Hello, and welcome to our newest episode of Smell the Zen, our podcast starring me, Armando Green, and our founder of Bloom, Mei Shi. Hello.
Hello,
Hello.
how are you?
I'm good. How are you? Today's episode is we're gonna get into the place that scent and fragrance has in the wellness space. So I guess to start us off, why do you think that scent plays such a strong, powerful role in the wellness space?
Well, as you know, I've been in the industry for over 30 years, and I really see the change really began with COVID.
Yeah.
During COVID, for the first time, people realized that the sense of smell is very important. Even before we find rapid tests, people understood that if they lost sense of smell, it's pretty much a sign that they have COVID. So what else can sense of smell tell us? More and more people become interested because of that discovery. I remember one of the surveys that people were asked before COVID was, we have 5 senses as humans, and if you have to lose one sense, what would that be? Many people apparently picked the sense of smell as the least important to them. COVID changed that. When you cannot smell, you also cannot taste. All of a sudden, your favorite food tastes like a rubber, and your favorite flowers does not work for you. So that's when the link of smell and our well-being is very much established. But it goes much more beyond that. So I think our Smell the Zen is really one of the few podcasts that focus on the sense, not only about the art and the joy, but also the science of smell.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and how important that sense of smell can be. One of the questions I had for you is why do you think that scent is so overlooked in terms of our senses? When you say how important sense of smell is, it sounds like it should be a no-brainer, but for some reason people seem to rank it the least important of their senses.
Well, I think some of it has to do with the opportunity that marketers has used with our sense of vision and with our sense of hearing. As you know, music has become so prevalent. We can listen to music anytime, anywhere we want. And so there's a lot of advertising that is on radio. Yeah. When you think of vision, even more so, right? We are constantly using our eyes to watch TV, to look at interesting episode of, news or just to watch our favorite shows. But when it's about the sense of smell, it's more primal, it's more individualistic. Society generally think of fragrance or odor as either good or bad.
Yeah.
There's not enough curiosity that's devoted to this topic really until COVID.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting because when you mentioned COVID and the shift that it caused in terms of how we view our senses of smell, how would you say that the industry has sort of addressed that this new importance of scent in our lives, or this new awareness, I guess, in the culture of how important our sense of smell is?
It's interesting. When I think about Bloom and how we launched this brand really to promote and leverage the science of smell for better well-being for everyone, we are one of the few companies that are doing that. Fragrance, or the industry of fragrance, is really divided into 2 areas. Flavor, which is for food. When you eat chocolate, when you had your yogurt, sometimes it's flavored because without the flavor, it's harder for someone to digest or just even want to eat it. So the flavor industry is very much focused on how to enhance food, how to give it more exciting flavors. On the fragrance side, we have fine fragrance. Everybody buys those fragrances in a bottle that comes beautifully packaged. most of the time, those fragrances are more elusive, or they are more imaginative, more romantic, I would say. It's not really based on any emotions, but more on that imagination. So you have beautiful, you have eternity, you have things that are fantasy. And then you have more functional fragrances that we see from when we use laundry. The detergent has fragrances, right? Some people really love that because it gives you that memory of clean, laundered linen. And then you have even fragranced or scented trash bag these days to cover the odor. So the industry is continually doing what it's always been doing, following each other in terms of, the peach is trending. Everybody start using peach.
Right.
Palm is, coconut is trending. Everybody's using palm and coconut. So there's a lack of a vision of really rooting the entire collection, or the philosophy of designing a whole new collection based on scientifically proven benefits of aromas in the world. And I feel we are addressing it, and I hope more companies will help to address this, because they're natural, they have a lot of ingredient in the world that we're familiar with, and they're more affordable than, let's say, going to a spa or getting a treatment to help you get some of that well-being benefit.
Yeah, that term, like functional fragrance, is something like I think is so unique to us, because I've never really encountered like that idea before, like the idea that a fragrance has a function. I guess that kind of circles back to the idea of like why maybe people don't see like sense of smell as maybe as important as our others, because for the most part, like generally speaking, fragrance isn't really something you think of as like functional, especially because, like you said, it's so subjective. One person can like a scent, and another person can like find it completely repulsive.
Right.
But it's, I guess it's like a really interesting way to look at it, like the idea of a fragrance having a specific purpose and like it being able to like do something specific for you.
Yes, so the idea of the interaction of aroma in nature and how it affects us emotionally has been proven over and over. It's not just self-reporting. You could be blindfolded, and I put a citrus, the peel. The most immediate thing you're going to say is, "Oh, it smells so fresh."
Yeah.
It makes me feel very wake up. It makes me joyful. On the other hand, if I put a lavender in front of you, even if you have never really been to a lavender field, you feel somewhat more peaceful, restful, right? So, and these are not imaginative benefits. Scientists has been able to really look at functional MRI and look at EEG of your brain wave to say that this actually is the case, that when you smell certain things like sandalwood too, you feel calmer. When you smell certain things such as citrus or all those spices, chili pepper, it's very difficult to stay still when you smell chili peppers. They meant to stir you and excite you. So functions of those fragrance and aroma on humans is actually historical, right? As you probably know, Asian civilizations in different parts of the world really use fragrance not just for food, but also for making them feel they're closer to God, or making them feel they're clean, even when they couldn't take shower all the time. So it has a historical place in our life. It's just that people don't give it too much thought.
Yeah. So one of the questions I wanted to ask was, how has your own relationship with scent changed, like in your journey, like starting Bloom and just being in the fragrance space altogether?
That is a very interesting question because it's such a long journey. When I was growing up, I never imagined I would end up working in the fragrance industry. But what I was is that I was a very picky eater. And I grew up in the 60s and 70s, and at that time we don't have refrigerators. So food was traditionally stored in a cabinet close to the window so that you have fresh air. But more than often, the food would go bad. And my mom and sister, who did not have a strong sense of smell as I do, would eat them right away. And I would always have a hard time. I would just refuse to swallow, because when you swallow, you really taste the sense the most.
Yeah.
So I would just keep the food in my mouth, sometimes for half an hour without chewing. And my mom get very mad at me, but I always can tell when food gets spoiled. So growing up, that kind of helped me to be able to tell when something is not good.
Yeah.
So that sense of letting my nose tell me what's up with the food helped me prepare to later on when I work with fragrances. So that ability expanded to identify a lot more different families of fragrances, as you probably now learned, right? You understand there's probably more than 10 families, ranging from ozonic, which is really the smell of water, to a lot more intense, such as oriental notes, animal notes that are a lot more sort of heavy. During the last 30 years, I would say, I've also participated with so much launches with major companies like Target, where it gave me a very good bird eye view of what American consumers' taste has shifted.
Yeah.
I remember when I started in the early 90s, single note is all the rage for home fragrance. We would have a lot of, just oranges or vanillas. And when I started the business, I started pairing them. So that was a really groundbreaking new thing, because most of the brand in home fragrance in the 90s really have, citrus or vanilla or wood.
Yeah.
And I went in to create Chesapeake Bay Candle. The first collection already have mint with watermelon. I have vanilla and lavender, both of which actually are calming.
Yeah.
But no one actually put them together. So I've always been very interested in blending, as well as creating more complex sort of fragrances that is not so easily, you cannot really tell right away. So it has more body, it has more notes, it has more complexity. But my focus completely shifted once we focused on building a more wellness-driven fragrance. So the goal is not just complexity, it's really what ingredients can help boost that function we are forming, right? Whether it's focus, whether that's nostalgic, we want that to be the highlight for each fragrance. So it's really shifted over the years.
Now that's interesting, because once you said that and I kind of thought about it a little bit, I feel like the single note, like fragrant, like home fragrance and stuff like that, it is kind of just like one thing. So if it's a citrus, even if it is like, if it's just called like citrus, it's still like all citrus. So it's not like a mix of anything. Whereas with Bloom's candles, I have noticed like I can smell things that I recognize, but it might not be something that's like I would immediately be able to call, because
it's a lot more sophisticated. It has layers, right? It has highs and lows. And I think that is the characteristic of a really well-built formula that's meant to balance the different ingredient, but also giving you longer lasting effect, so that when you smell them, when you're enjoying them, it also stays a little longer.
Yeah. And what would you say are some of the more interesting things that you've observed in terms of how people connect with scent, like just like in your own like observations, like as like creating fragrance?
Right. I often actually tell the story about when I was working a lot with big retailers such as Target and Kohl's. Oftentimes, before a big tornado or natural disaster, we will see a lot of orders. And right afterward, we'll see a lot more orders. That means people during time of stress and big natural disasters actually go ahead to buy fragrance candles in those retailers. So we ask consumers during some of the focus groups where we interview them, and we say, you're going to have only 2 hours sometimes to vacate your home, and you're going to spend about a week in a shelter. Why do you bring a fragrance candle? Why not something more practical?
Yeah.
Maybe your jewelries or your photo albums, something personal. And they say, actually, it's very helpful because those tend to be the moment when we're really scared. We are very unsettled. We don't know how long it's going to take us to stay away from home. And we feel very unsettled. And when we burn a fragrance that we often burn at home, it immediately settles us down. It immediately connects us to our home and give us a sense of something familiar, that it's almost something we can grasp.
Yeah.
So this very honest conversation more than 10 years ago really woke me up. And that's the moment I felt that consumers actually already voted by choosing something that we took for granted as a very, it's not something that people go to store to shop. We call them impulsive item.
Yeah.
It's not impulsive. It's a must because it has to do with how to take care of themselves mentally, right? It's self-care at its best. So this is what eventually triggered me after COVID, noticing that people are spending even more time at home. And yet we as an industry has not evolved to cater to that emotional need. And I feel there's a big void. And another story I know that it just popped up recently, it's not about the power of fragrance, it's the power of odor.
Yeah.
The story broke because one of the top ranking women tennis players, while she was playing against an opponent, she couldn't focus. She said the body odor of her opponent was such that she just completely lost it.
Yeah.
And she eventually lost the game. Now, you would wonder how, when you're playing, it's such a long distance, how can she smell it?
Yeah.
Again, there are those of us who I call super tasters. They probably have developed that strong sense. Either they are born with it or they practice on it. Nevertheless, it could also be there is a breeze or a wind blowing and she smelled it. And this is what I say, why scent and aroma and odor play such an emotional role, right? We have a fragrance, as you know, called Focus.
Yeah.
We actually know certain fragrances can help you, such as eucalyptus, particularly when it's combined with a very pleasant, fresh fragrance called lime. We talk about lime.
Yeah.
You smell lime, you feel positive, you feel alert. So when these two are together, they really help you to focus on something. And the opposite that also true. So when you all of a sudden were trying to focus and playing that game, some odor came. First, you worry about it's yourself, right? You feel so conscious,
if it's that strong,
It's that strong, it has to be you. And then you started looking for the sources. And that is how you lost focus. And that's how you lost your bearing, and that's how you lost the game.
Right.
In my view, it's completely relatable. It's yet another not so great example of showing how we are very much a creature that is very easily moved by smell and odor.
Yeah. That story reminds me of when I used to work at a jewelry store. We took repairs, so we would have customers come in and bring stuff, and there was this one customer who would come in all the time, and he wore very, very strong cologne, and this wasn't a scent that was subtle. It was very powerful. Yeah, very overpowering, and it was something that once he was in, it was all anybody could focus on.
It's almost like it's so thick that the air is froze.
No,
and
you almost want to step outside for some just for some fresh air. And it's crazy because to us it's that strong, but for him to be piling it on like that, it must have been he couldn't that first layer he couldn't smell, that second layer he couldn't smell. So it is really interesting the difference that in how people can even just perceive the amount of a fragrance.
Well, you're touching on something that also we at Bloom are very interested, which is how sensitive are each person about fragrance But most importantly, what if something is wrong? What if that actually shows that person is starting to lose sense of smell? And this is something we can talk about in another episode, because after COVID, many people realized they lost sense of smell temporarily, maybe for the longest a week, maybe 2 weeks. But you also have heard long COVID.
Yeah.
Many of the long COVID patients have lost most of their sense of smell. And this is a problem that is not just long COVID. You could have that when you're aging. In fact, it almost goes without saying that for Alzheimer's and Parkinson's patients, they will have declined sense of smell to some point where they probably didn't smell much. So if that customer is suffering from declining sense of smell, it's not exceptional, it's the norm. I think the number is that about 5 to 10% of the population has some kind of sense loss of smell in our country. It's just different degrees.
Yeah. And when you say that, it makes me think, like, I feel like losing sight and losing hearing is something that we often hear about with like aging or just generally in life, but you never really hear people talk about necessarily losing their sense of smell and then like by relation taste, like as time has gone on. I think that just kind of goes to show what we were talking about earlier in terms of us not necessarily always seeing scent as like
as important or vital
as a sense.
Well, another thing I think is being very difficult to talk about sense of smell, because for a long time we know that it's really the only sense that interacts with the outside of the world, right? When you see vision, your body is not interacting with the vision itself.
Yeah.
But when you are smelling, your body through the protein at the soft tissues inside of your nose actually are in contact with the molecules of the aroma, and they interact. The protein send signals into our brain, and the brain classify it, matching it with memory, so that it says, oh, you're smelling a rose, or you're smelling a lavender, or you're smelling a citrus. So that kind of interaction is actually so complicated that when you talk about sense of smell, you're talking about very broad disciplines, such as chemistry, such as neurology, such as psychology, physiology, because it has to do with sleep, remember? It has to do with focus. So these are physiological activities. So it's very complex, and it's crossing and medicine, of course.
Yeah.
So it crossed so many different disciplines. That's why I feel it's not because we don't pay attention. I feel it's that science has not yet caught up to the complexity and the inner works enough for us to have a very clear picture. You may also notice that you mentioned the other two, the vision and hearing a lot. And I want to ask you a question.
Yeah.
You know the receptors, genes that are responsible for helping you to hear. How many genes do you think are connected to the sense of hearing?
I would assume like a lot. So
because you can hear heavy metal, you can hear
so
bird, right? You can hear very far. You can tell how far, how close, right? How frequent. So there's a lot of dimensions.
Yeah.
What do you think are these dimensions boil down to when it's about the number of genes and receptors that's corresponding?
My guess, I'm going to swing big, and I'll say like 100.
Well, you're not far. It's actually just over 50. So, some are responsible maybe for detecting the distance. Some are maybe responsible for detecting the frequency, right? Some maybe are responsible for the kind of fragrance, the kind of sound. So there are about 50. So let's talk about vision. I'm sure there's receptors that help us identify color, movement, distance, right? The same. What do you think are the number of genes responsible to the receptors responsible for
Sight.
Vision.
I would say if smell was 50, then I think there's probably more in sight, so I'll say like 80.
Well, it's actually also around 50, 50 or ish. So you can tell that they are both very complex, and they help us to form the vision of the world in a more three-dimensional, immersive way. Now let's talk about the sense of smell. Now that you have guessed very close of how many receptors we have for the sense of smell, sense of hearing and vision, what do you think the number of receptors and genes for the sense of smell do we have?
I'm going to guess probably around like 200.
Well, it's actually a very big number, and you are still not enough. It's over 300. That tells us how complex this sense is.
Yeah.
And remember, our senses also evolve, right? The things we don't need, we lose. The things we really need, we develop, and we have more of them. So as humans evolve, the evolution side actually said we need a lot more sense of smell than vision and hearing genes. And it says a lot just with that number. And what it also means is that with this number to interact with each other, a lot can happen, either to damage our sense of smell or helping us.
Yeah.
And a lot more can be done to really connect the dots.
Yeah, when you think about like the evolutionary reasoning behind like why we would have developed way more sense of smell versus like sight or taste, like for like a caveman or whatever, when he's hunting or like when he's or when they're gathering, it's like color is important to tell maybe the berries apart, but the sense of smell would be even more important in terms of identifying like if food is spoiled.
Yes,
if food is spoiled.
And guess what else? It's danger.
Yep.
Right? So if they smell fire or smell another animal, they will immediately run for their life. And I feel this is why, because there are so many different varieties and variables in the smell sense, we developed so many to go with it. And it's just the beginning of unearth this, because this discovery was made relatively recently. And the two scientists, Richard and Linda, actually won a Nobel Prize for that year. So you can see how extraordinary that scientists, after all these years, discovering other genes that connected to our body. This is the one that is one of the latest discovery. And I'm very proud of the fact that we are doing something about it in our small way. It's not life-changing, but it's definitely life-enhancing.
Yeah, for sure. On a personal note, like what are some fragrances that you like to keep around you or that you gravitate towards like in your everyday life?
So I have always been more gravitating towards men's cologne fragrance, which is kind of similar to what I would call ozonic, very citrusy, relatively transparent fragrance. I'm not someone wearing a very heavy fragrance. I like something that you almost feel you can smell it, yet you can't really tell what it is. So this is the state of how strong I want the fragrance around me to be. I always like to have a little flower also, but the flower has to be a lot more juicy. So remember, one of our fragrance balance is the white lotus. Imagine white lotus, imagine white tea. And the combination is a great balance of not too sweet, but it's juicy. Not too green, because tea can be bitter. But it's a white tea, so that it's almost a perfect combination of both floral note and green note. And then there's a pop of mandarin there. So that's everything I like about fragrances is all there in that note, in that particular fragrance.
A balance is actually my personal favorite that we have here too. I gravitate, like in my own personal life, I gravitate more towards like gourmand, which is like sweet kind of like almost dessert like kind of
because it makes you
smell.
feel comfort.
Yeah,
comfort.
I have a
right?
sweet tooth, and like personally, so I just gravitate towards that stuff. But balance, like when I smelled it, like what you were saying, where it has like a sweet sort of like feel to it, but it's not dessert. Like it's like refreshing and very like centering.
It's for you very centering because all the memories that it goes with it,
Yeah.
right? It's where you feel the most welcomed, the most at home. And as a spice, I didn't know cinnamon that well because we don't use cinnamon as much. In fact, Asian culture, particularly Chinese culture, we don't cook a lot of dessert. But when I came, I realized during holidays, you can't get away from
Yeah.
cinnamon, right? There's a lot of pumpkin pies, there's a lot of cinnamon rolls, and a lot of cinnamon citrus, dessert. So what I think it is not only does fragrance and aroma brings us emotion, it also brings up a lot of memory.
Yeah.
And that's another power that sometimes I feel it's so interesting because there's no sense that brings you right where you want to be that is so fast because of that memory. Because our sense of smell and the sense of the memory zone, they're connected. The nerve endings are connected. So I really feel this is another tool that help people to feel calm, or a lot of times it's that relationship between what they remember and why they feel that way. Remember when I said people before the natural disasters went to buy particular candles
Yeah.
that they always burn at home because they want their memory to comfort them. And that memory evokes certain emotions, and that is what they're looking for. So we go circle 100% back
Yeah.
to why we started this podcast, is that you could smell what you want, which is Zen or a sense of joy, a sense of togetherness, could be spiritual. You want to feel spiritual, or you want to just simply feel relaxed. So this is why I think this topic, I'm inviting people asking questions, actually, and we will try to find the answers. You know, we have a lot of great industry connections, and we work with some scientists also in this field, and I feel we are breaking into a very interesting new world.
Yeah. All right, you guys, that is the end of our episode. Thank you so much for tuning in to Smell the Zen, our podcast where we delve into the art and science of fragrance. Tune in and on every major streaming platform, Spotify, Apple Music, iHeartMedia, and if you want to watch a video of our podcast, you can tune into our YouTube channel. If you're watching this on YouTube, please like, comment, and subscribe, and share this podcast with all your friends. We would love to have a larger audience where we can share our discoveries about the world of fragrance with you guys. Thank you so much for tuning in.